And the theory is that when we would eat foods that had sugar, mainly fruits, obviously, they would give us the energy that we needed to survive. This is obviously for survival tactics, right? To give us the energy to hunt and gather, to hunt down animals, and will we eat them as food, or to run away from other animals that we would be food to them. So this was sort of a way of us to survive. It's in our DNA. That's why sugar, like, really excites us in our brains. And by the way, this also extends to salt and fat and other foods that have lots of calories, because in a similar sense, we never knew when our next meal was going to be coming from. So when we would hunt down an animal, we would try to eat as much as we can right then and there. So we eat all the fat and all the salty stuff. So again, it's something that we enjoy eating and makes us want to eat more and more and more. So so next time you're on your sofa and you find yourself eating a whole bag of Cheetos, you can thank your prehistoric ancestors for that. You know I have that problem myself. And the other thing that sugar does with us, it actually tricks our minds to think, and making us think when we're not full, when we really are full. For example, let's just say you're gonna have a bowl of, I don't know, cauliflower, right, or broccoli, and you're gonna eat it, and you're gonna eat it, and at some point you're gonna be like, okay, your stomach's gonna tell you you're full, you have full capacity. It tells your brain, all right, we're good down here. We're done. Let's go on to the next thing we're gonna do today. We're gonna, I don't know, go for a walk, read a book, whatever the case may be. However, when you eat sugar or something that's very sweet, you don't get that same feeling. You could keep eating and keep consuming and keep consuming. It bypasses that part of the brain that tells your stomach that, okay, we had enough. So that could be a problem, because it's obviously just going to lead to overeating, right? And then you become overweight, and well, we know the problems with that. So that's kind of like the trouble side with sugar and sweets as such. Now, so how long have we been consuming sugar in a sense? Well, that's kind of hard to say. Well, the first form of sweets, let's say, what is the rules? Did you want to go over the rules, Zach?
Yeah, I'll just go over the rules pretty quickly. Again, this is not an academic presentation, as Sergio had said. This is secular, so we're not going to do any kind of religious, sacraments here, or pro, against, or political. There's no political here and that stuff. Be respectful, when you ask questions, chat. We do encourage questions, comments, clarifications. If you could raise your hand, I can either unmute you, or you can put a chat question, and I'll read the questions to Sergio as he goes. Sergio likes to hear questions as he goes through it. Otherwise, and then it's kind of like, it's not a class, obviously, but it's a one-on-one, two-on-one type of thing. And then we recorded this. So if you guys want to watch it, I've posted the video, where you can watch it. Go to our website, Omnicar, or our meetup, and Robert had posted our meetup as well. Sergio, sorry, go ahead.
No problem. Thank you so much. Okay, so
Sergio, one question though. So you've mentioned that we start consuming sugar. How long ago did we start as Homo sapiens consuming sugar, or was it prior to that, Neanderthals and stuff like that? What was the archaeological type of finding, or that stuff? Or
hard to say exactly what species of was consuming the first sweetener, but I would say thousands of years ago, the first type of sugar substance would have been honey. And honey, obviously, we know, is made by bees, and they would have ate that raw, in its most natural form, despite they probably got stung by bees. But anyhow, they were, and honey's found all over, the world, except for right here, the Americas. They didn't actually have honey here. Bees were introduced here in the 16th century. So the people of this region of the world, most likely they would have consumed tree sap, agave, or other fruits that have strong sugary content, and they would have made that their own form of a sweetener. But yeah, I would say honey would be the first of all the sugars that they came across. And honey is not as potent as the cane sugar, which we'll discuss in a little bit. So
you want to read some of the answers, or what would you like to do? Just for fun.
Read some of the what? I'm sorry.
some of the answers that people gave when you said, what are the
Oh,
sweetest things?
yes.
So
Sweet
some
caramel.
people,
Okay.
some people write, I'm happy, I'm a sugar addict and happy to be one. Perfect vanilla,
Yes, yes. And this was
perfect
my
vanilla ice
point.
cream, not too sweet and plain butter. Yeah.
Exactly, exactly. No, I appreciate the participation. Yeah. And so to the point I was trying to make is that when you're eating whatever the case that is that you like it, for example, Christina says dulce de leche. Okay, imagine you're having that after you had a whole big meal and Thanksgiving. You're still gonna consume more and more and more. It just, you could go on and on and on. Candy and chocolate fudge. Yeah, Jordan, almonds, peanuts. Fantastic. All right, so I don't feel as bad for eating Oreo cookies all the time. But anyway, thank you for participating in that. So as I was saying, the earliest form was honey. But then about 8,000 years ago BC, 8,000 BC, sorry, sugarcane, as we know it, was starting to be cultivated in an area in New Guinea, okay, which is in the Pacific. And that then becomes where the first form of the natural form of sugar starts to come about, right? And the way they would consume it was they would literally chew it in reeds. So they would cut up the crop, and then inside would be like a very hard, but yet a still soft substance and very moist. And they would chew on it. It would kind of be like maybe a gum of their day. It wasn't necessarily something that they would use for ingredients. Well, they might have. We're not necessarily sure. But it was something that they had just for recreational purposes. So that's kind of how maybe sugar got its start in that part of the world, New Guinea. Eventually, it'll make its way to other areas such as the Philippines, and then in India. And then when it arrives in India, then it starts to take a drastic turn because it was actually in India is when they were able to first refine it and then crystallize it, making it into now a spice. Okay, this is now very important because now it becomes literally a commodity. This is something that's going to be life-changing for the world. And I'll get into how the refinery process is just as an overview. But yeah, so they create sugar mills, which is kind of like a machine that will crush the cane and then go through a process, and then they will eventually sell it in the markets. It will become a very, very potent and important ingredient or spice, if you want to call it that. In fact, there's an old recipe in Sanskrit that it's a rice pudding recipe. It's actually written below here that has made of milk, sweet barley, and ginger. So they were making obviously recipes with this going some thousands of years ago. And it'll eventually make its way to the Mediterranean. Now, the Greeks and Romans knew about it, but not so much in a sense where they took it and they would bring it to that part of the world, that part of the Mediterranean. It kind of stayed in India. In fact, the Greeks kind of recognized it as something that had a medicinal purposes. They could use it for medicine and to make remedies out of it. It was actually one of Alexander's generals by the name of Nerchus who writes, they discovered a reed in India that brings honey without the help of bees, in which the intoxicating drink is made through the plant that bears no fruit, which I think is fascinating. So they've never been seeing such a thing like that, let alone that it could give you that feeling of a rush of sugar. But like I said, it doesn't really take off so much in that part of the world, and possibly because A, it was really hard to transport, and B, it was very, very expensive. It wasn't something that they could all afford to have. So, and I'll explain why. What else? And then around the 7th century, when Islam expansion came about, and then they would then conquer that region of the world, Persia, India, Egypt. They would then come in contact with this sugary substance, and even the texts that were left behind by the Greeks in Constantinople. And we all know that Islam was responsible for a lot of the ancient translations that were left behind, a lot of the mathematicians and the philosophers, and a lot of the stuff that was lost after the fall of Rome, and then reintroduced it into the medieval world, mainly in Persia or in Al-Andalusia, Spain. So it was a very important time, and there's no There was obviously sugar would certainly be one of the key spices. And again, they reserved it mostly for medical purposes, medicinal purposes. It was certainly something it's hard to say if some of those things are still plausible today. I think a lot of the medicine from the ancient world is discredited, but nevertheless, that's the knowledge that they had at the time, and they certainly took it with them. Now, in Egypt, they actually become masters in refining it, making it in its widest form. So in India, it was going to be more like the brown sugar, right? They just took it and made it a simple process. But later in Egypt, they'll now start to put it into more extensive processing to the point it's closer to the sugar that we see today. It's white, it's crystallized, and they would obviously add it in their teas or in their drinking water, whatever they were cooking. So it was something that they were, very, very serious about.
Sergio, question.
Yeah.
Sergio, can you hear me? So the
Yeah, I can hear you.
Yeah, question is the following. So I know, you're coming to Crusades, and we're going to talk about Dark Ages, but after the Roman, West Roman Empire had dissipated or disappeared, and then we only left with Eastern Roman Empire.
Yeah.
Do you think that sugar production that Rome knew from India had also disappeared as well, and then it came from through Berbers to Al-Andalusia, and then got reintroduced back to the Europe? Or that's hard to say?
I don't believe so. The production of sugar did not stop after the fall of Rome, at least not in the eastern provinces, because it never really took off in the Mediterranean as much. I'm sure it did exist, but it wasn't something that we would see in Gaul or in Britannia or maybe Al-Andalus, because of the Arabs, the Muslims that were occupying that territory for a really long time. But overall, I would say the production in Egypt and the production in India was still pretty much going. The question is, who was able to buy it and who was able to purchase? You have to understand the production of sugar is very intense. First of all, these plants grow in these really warm climates, all right? Like for example, in Guinea or the Philippines, where it's really, really hot all year round, okay? So, and to work on these fields is very, very labor intensive, okay? It's not like picking an apple off a tree or strawberries from the ground. You have to hack these plants down using a blade in the hot sun. So you have to be dressed a certain way so you're cool and you're not overheating. Very, very labor intensive, and it's not a job a lot of people want to do. And this is why slavery comes, but we'll discuss that later. And number two, to transport it. You got to remember, like for example, right now, if you go into your spice cabinet, right, you take out some salt, pepper, cinnamon, nutmeg, they're going to be in little jars, and that's it. They're very lightweight, and those little jars will last a long time. You'll need them, 3-6 months, depending on how much you cook, maybe years. I know I have stuff for years that I never have to replenish. But sugar, when was the last time you go to the supermarket and you pick up a bag of sugar? That's like 5 pounds, right? Imagine someone drops on your lap. It's a very, very heavy because we consume a lot of it. So that being said, to transport it by land is going to be quite some effort. Even by ship, it takes up a lot of space. So between the fact that how much labor is involved to get it to the main process and then to transport it makes the cost very, very, very high. So getting back, the regions that were further from where they were able to produce it probably would not have much access to it, in my guess. I hope that answers your question. I know I kind of went different directions. Okay, so
no, it's interesting because when Western Roman Empire had fallen and we left with the Constantinople, Eastern Roman Empire, the studies like Aristotle and Aristophanes, and it moved to the Arab, to the Arab world through area of, so to speak, Damascus, that was actually part of the Eastern Roman Empire. And then during the Dark Ages, up until I guess the Crusades, which you're going to talk about, the Aristotle didn't come back to Europe, and therefore that was an important aspect I want to point out.
Yeah, I would agree with that. Yeah, of course, because as you can see the text there, there must have been traders. I think you mentioned the Norsemen or the Vikings that would have had access to some of the whether the Silk Roads or the other caravans that were coming east. And yeah, sure, they probably would have been able to trade or have access to sugar, you know?
Exactly correct. I mean, Vikings did trade with Baghdad through, Volga River and Russia during that time. And we all know, obviously, the Russian state, Ruriks, were actually a Viking state, like Convergence. You have some.
Which state? I'm sorry.
The Rus state, Russian state.
Oh yes,
was
yeah.
set up by
Exactly.
Viking, or they used to be called Varangians. Yeah.
Okay. Yes. I did hear that. Okay. Yeah. It's really hard to say. There's probably been a lot of trading through the fall of Rome with all types of spices and precious metals and technology afterwards. One can only guess. But anyway, so now let's get into the 11th century, where the Crusades begin, right? Actually, began a little before that, but this is when most of the Europeans, when I say Europeans, I would say mostly Frankish and English armies will come in contact with sugar, not for the very first time, but at least in a way where it's more accessible to them, where now they understand, oh wow, this sugar thing is great. Let's see if we could bring it back or we could produce it. Because obviously it's something that's a delicatessen, it's well received, and those that are involved in the process could be could reach a certain level of wealth if done correctly. So, but it's also important to point out that in Venice they were already having connections with the Muslim world, the Arabs from the East, that as we just discussed, there were trading routes, and they were already trading and it was already making its way to Europe, but it was very, very, very expensive, as I explained. So there was a point where Europeans had going to establish a plant in Cyprus. So Cyprus went through a lot of different rulers, was ruled by different people at different times. I think Byzantines ruled at some point, and then I think Richard I also ruled it in England. Then Templar Knights ruled. So it went through a lot of different kingdoms. Sorry, and then at some point they will use that because I guess the climate in Cyprus is warm enough for the trees to grow, the plants to grow in that point. But however, it's still very, very expensive. It's not something that's easily grown and shipped, as I explained. So it becomes still, the Europeans are now involved in this, but not nowhere near, as we'll see later in the centuries that come. To the right of that is a it's actually a large, a sugar mill. I don't know if you can see that. Yeah, this is pretty much how they crush the cane. So they put the actual trees in there, and then they crush it as much as they can. When that happens, juice is going to come out, and then there's actually a chamber beneath there which is going to hold all the juice, to which point they're going to boil it. And when they boil it, it starts to turn into a syrupy style substance, and it's going to turn more brown. By the way, the juice is already brown. And then once that happens, it gets hard to the point where then they start to break it, and they actually add already processed sugar into it. They break it down and it becomes crystallized. That's the rawest form, and it'll still be brown, hence brown sugar. Now and then they'll reboil it again, and that becomes and after they reboil it again, there'll be another brown substance. That substance is called molasses, and molasses is just really, really raw, like sugar residue. And when that ferments, that could turn into rum, which they'll do later in the 15th century, 16th century, I just say, in the New World. So now this brings us to the age of exploration, where Spain and Portugal will have exclusive access to the New World, and they're going to obviously try to colonize it. They do colonize it, and they're able to bring back plenty of silver and gold. and other precious commodities, different foods and stuff like that. And then although the plantation sugar doesn't necessarily take off right away, it'll be maybe another century or two before they still really double down and trying to produce it. I should say, one of the first artificial sugarcane farms by the Europeans, Spain and Portugal, would be in the Canary Islands. The Canary Islands is about east from Africa. It's a little island. And there they're able to produce multiple fields of sugar cane because, well, it's the weather's warm enough. And the indigenous people that work on it, they're pretty much worked to the death. They don't really, like as I said earlier, it's a very, very labor and tough job to do. And it's Europeans are not necessarily the easiest to work for. So that's a problem. Anyhow, in 1493, Columbus brings sugarcane from the Canary Islands to Hispaniola, which is the Dominican Republic and Haiti today. And eventually, in a few years, sugarcane will be, production sugar will be a very important crop in the New World. And this will be eventually changed. You really can't talk about slavery and sugar without talking one or the other. I mean, slavery, I'm not saying that there was no slavery before sugar and there was no sugar before slavery. There was both existed, but at this point in time, when the two cross paths, it seems like it's now going to really explode and become like this crazy time for the colonial power, the European powers, and abusing their colonies and put everything, all their morals in the back, and just continue to focus on what they want is just producing wealth on a massive scale. So
Sergio, just one addition. The reason Columbus brought sugarcane to the New World is his mother-in-law owned sugarcane fields, and that's why he did. And I guess this particular plant, you don't need to bring seeds. You could just resettle a part of the sugarcane and that grows. So it's not like a potato where you have to bring seeds to grow.
Correct.
Yeah.
I did not know that about Christopher Columbus's mother-in-law. So she was involved in sugarcane. Oh, learned something new today. That's pretty interesting. Yes, that is true about the sugarcane. So when you once the sugarcane is ready to be chopped down, you don't actually unroot it from the ground. You really just cut like a good part of the stem and you leave that there, and then it'll just regenerate. So it's a crop that's continuously growing and growing and growing. So in some ways, it's very sustainable. That's what makes it hardy. So long as the weather is correct, you can't just grow it anyway. I don't think you could grow it in Europe or in parts of North America. It has to be in a area that's tropical at best, or at least it's warm all year round. But thank you for that little tip, that little piece of knowledge. So what else? So yeah, in 1500, the Portuguese now get into the production, and they obviously colonized Brazil for the most part. And this then becomes one of their key. They have other colonies in Africa, but Brazil would be one of their most powerful ones or most successful ones because of obviously the region that they're in. There's a lot of inhabitants there. There's a lot of land, and the soil's fertile for growth. Sugarcane obviously is going to be their main crop. By 1583, the pretty much Brazil is producing most of the world's sugar, okay, and competing against the Mediterranean or India, which was probably one of the earliest sugar producers prior to the Portuguese. But at this point, in 16th century, Portugal is on the sugar map. They are the sugar production capital. And with that said, as I said, it's a very labor-intensive process to make this sugar. They need to have physical people working on these sugarcane fields. And that originally they had indigenous people, the people that live in these lands. And they really, aside from the diseases they must have got from the Europeans, they probably could not keep up with the abuse and the torment and the hours of exploitation that they received from the Europeans. So they died off, basically. They died off, or they just, head for the hills, left. So they now had to go and get slaves from Africa. And that becomes a very intense, story of sugar production. Now,
but it's interesting, Sergio. One addition. Obviously, slavery was not invented by Portuguese and Spanish as far as taking people from Africa. There was a sub-Saharan slavery trade during the Arab conquest in the Arabic Peninsula, and therefore it was already perfected, and about 3 million or so souls had perished in a sub-Saharan movement of slaves, but obviously not for sugarcane, for other type of production work. You're absolutely correct. And then obviously here, because of the expansion of production, they need to bring more people, and they've used that as a blueprint to bring slaves.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you. Yeah, it's hard to say. I mean, I feel like the answer is slavery. Slavery has been around since war has been around, right? Nobody really knows how long we've been fighting each other. I think probably the first slave was probably the first captive of war. I captured you on the battlefield, and you beg for your life. I will spare you, but I'm going to take you back to my region, and I'm going to make you do the work that I don't want to do. Right. And in exchange, I'll let you live and I'll feed you. And then after a while, I'll be like, oh, I can get used to this. I'm going to look for more of these, let's call them slaves. And so next thing you know, that becomes a part of, war battle that if you capture somebody, could sell them off as a slave. Who knows for sure? It's really, again, I think slavery deserves its own discussion.
Yeah, but the only thing I just wanted to add, as Sergio had pointed out, right now, sugar at this time was a very highly desired commodity. And just to give you an example, there was a trader in Venice, basically was able to sell a pound of sugar for today's money. It would have been $10 million in 1600s. So that's how highly desired commodity this was. So obviously they were bringing slaves to make money because they thought out after this, just like oil right now, that sugar was that highly desirable commodity. Go ahead, sorry.
Yeah, I agree. It's important to understand slaves were not cheap. To purchase a slave was its own price. I'm not going to get into the dollar amount. I really don't know. But you got to remember that to keep a slave, you have to feed him. You have to take care. I know it's cruel to look at it that way, but it is something that you'd have to invest in, and hopefully you would get a return on that. So it was obviously something that they saw, although they were making tons of money, and obviously because a result of it, they human lives were suffered as a result. So as I was saying, Brazil had a few colonies, some in Africa, in addition to the Americas, and they had one in an area known then as Ndongo and Mataba, and it's close. It's actually where today is Angola. Sorry, and there was a chieftain there, and they were allies with the Portuguese. Right? They were allowed to have their own king, to have their own army, if you want to call them that, and they probably pay a tax, but they were allies for the Portuguese, and Portuguese did business there. They might have purchased slaves from other slavers in that region. But at some point, when the explosion of sugar production and the demand that kept growing, they had to keep up with the demand. And with that, they needed to obviously buy more land and obtain more slaves. And so with that, unfortunately, there wasn't probably enough slaves from the slavers in Africa. So they decided to just do as they please and decide to slave people that necessarily weren't being sold as slaves. And this lady here, her name is Queen Nzinga of the Ndongo and Mataba, and she's actually a daughter of the king prior to her being queen. And she actually, like I said, she was allies with the Portuguese. She actually spoke Portuguese. She was even baptized, and she had a relationship with them. Now, her brother, before she was the queen, her brother was the king after their father died, and he kind of had some conflict. They actually had conflicts within each other as well. But at some point, the Portuguese didn't necessarily want to take them or take their treaty seriously, and they were kind of at a conflict. To sum up the story, they just pretty much go all out at war. And obviously, they were no match to a European power that had firearms and so forth. So they fought against the Portuguese, who were trying to conquer their region and enslave their people. So Queen Nzinga was actually quite a leader in fighting off the Portuguese for many, many years. She was, I'm sure she had some military experience, but nevertheless, it was more like a hit and run. They didn't fight in battles for, in skirmishes and stuff like that, but they just kept the Portuguese out from their areas to the point where they would eventually given up. And there's a famous drawing of her, the one to the right, where allegedly when she's going to meet with the governor of Brazil to discuss, to negotiate their treaty and so forth. Everybody he has a chair and everybody else is standing, including her. And she felt that wasn't necessarily equal. That she felt like she's a ruler as much as he is, so they should both be sitting down. So she asks one of her slaves or one of her servants to form as a seat, so she could sit down and meet with the governor eye to eye in a form of dignity. So as you can see there, there's an individual crunched over, making her as a seat. And I don't think it's something insulting. It was perhaps he wanted to do it to show that he was loyal to his queen and that he was willing to fight for his people and so on and so forth. So eventually, this region, Ndongo and Mataba, doesn't get colonized by the Portuguese. And she ends up dying a natural death in 1663, which again, the amount of slaves that were brought by the New World, brought by the Europeans to the New World is an insane amount. They would pack them in ships, naked on top of each other for days. I mean, literally packing them like they were just like logs. They weren't even human beings, and in it's horrible conditions for weeks, crossing from Africa all the way to crossing the Atlantic to the Americas. So as you can imagine, a number of them died before they made over, and then that was just business to them. That's the way they saw it. They expected that, but nevertheless, it seemed like it was worth doing. It was worth all the trouble and the pain and the hardship that unfortunately they were willing to do. So that was one of the things that, again, and I'm not going to say it's because of sugar. It's anything, as we'll see in other parts of history, whether it be tobacco, it be cotton, anything. It seems like they want to employ slaves because I guess it's more profitable to them, but it's not very moral. So now, let's see, in 1807, Thomas Jefferson signs a bill to end the importation of slavery to the U.S. And then eventually Great Britain will follow this treaty as well. So you're allowed to have slaves if they're already already established slaves. That will eventually end, but you're not longer allowed to import them like they were doing all throughout the time. So this will, and who's to say if how strong this new act was enforced. And I'm sure there were slavers sneaking slaves in from all directions, regardless of the new law from the US.
Well,
So,
it's interesting. Around this time, also, I just want to add something, Sergio.
yeah.
During this, the War of Independence, sugar was also an important commodity in colonial in colonies, English colonies, and therefore British had imposed sugar tax, and therefore that was one of the reasons for the revolution, as well, than other things as well, which is there was a tax on land, and we know, Boston Tea Party and all this other stuff. So it was very taxing, obviously. And then also England wanted to, or British wanted to focus on their sugar production, and therefore they kind of didn't really want to fight the war. I mean, they lost the war here, to the colonies, and for the war of independence, but they also wanted to focus on their sugar production. That's why, and somewhat, they didn't really dedicate too much of the troops to hold on to the United States as well.
Oh, that's a great fact. Yeah, that makes sense because, as we know, the British had a lot of colonies in the Caribbean. Originally Jamaica was part of Spain's empire, but eventually the British captured, not just the British, but I think the Dutch as well. The Dutch also had their hands, and perhaps even the French. So yeah, I mean, sugar, I would say at this point, the cost of sugar was probably going down slightly because the production was so high and it was closer to those regions. So they were able to get more sugar to more areas. And so more people had access to it. And to your point, the British taxed it because they know that would affect a lot of people. It wasn't something that some random little spice, like saffron, for example. I don't think a lot of people consume saffron every day.
Right.
It's expensive, but it's not like a
and another, if I may, one point, Napoleon himself thought of sugar pretty highly, and actually set up about 40 factories during the during his reign. And when there was a blockade by England of Napoleon and French troops, the only thing that they could not handle is when sugars were in limited supplies, and therefore they were setting up more factories because there was no import, because all of the colonies, English colonies, were producing sugar, and therefore they weren't getting them enough in France, and that's what caused a lot of the rift as well. Sorry.
Fantastic. No, it's a brilliant point. Thank you. And it's a perfect segue for my next slide. Because of that, now getting sugar could be a challenge, or it's too expensive. They had to come up with another source, right? Where there's a demand, that needs to be a supply. And so when there's a problem, they need to solve it somehow. So then actually this is before Thomas Jefferson signs the bill to end slavery, or the importation of slaves to the United States. There was a German or Prussian chemist named Andre S. Margraf, and he discovers that you can derive sugar from beets, regular beets. And beets are very sugar. He's able to process that and actually make sugar very close to the cane sugar. Although some people think it tastes a little off, it's not the same, but it's certainly an alternative. And being that beets are not something that you need to grow in a specific area, this could be very helpful in bringing the cost of sugar down and making it more accessible to a lot of people. And it's great that you brought up Napoleon, because Napoleon was actually an advocate of this. He actually was a supporter of creating beet sugar in France and other parts. So at a point, he was actually ridiculed for it because people didn't really take it that seriously. Until maybe another 50 years or so, where as actually a student of Markov, Karl Archard was able to mass produce it on a huge level. So there was actually a time, I would say almost about 100 years or so, where beet sugar was a thing. People, I mean, I've never came across beet sugar. You can still buy it today, but it's definitely an alternative for people that just couldn't have access to sugar, or it was just too costly, or to your point, when there's wars, there's battles, there's sometimes either embargoes, or sometimes there's just delays on shipments. As you know, with pandemic and everything like that, there's just, it drives up the costs, or there's very limited supplies. So with the Napoleonic Wars, I could see that beet juice would make sense for countries that would not be able to trade with Spain and Portugal or England, who pretty much control the sugar market at this point in time, which I think is interesting. So beet sugar is eventually falls out of fashion, again, because they keep making regular sugar that it's a preferred product, a preferred spice that the price of regular sugar and beet sugar is very close to one another. That people would rather get the cane sugar because
All
it's has a better taste to it. I don't know.
So do we have a question?
Yeah.
The question is coming from Kay. Was the entire process of sugar manufacturing done in plantation, or were different business involved? So was there a third person, or the so to speak, an affiliate or a conduit that would be involved in that?
Well, I would say in this particular time, they would be private. It would be private enterprises. So they would own the sugar plant, and they would own the sugar mill. It's very likely when it came to refining it and stuff like that, they might have sent it to another third party. I'm not 100% sure of that. I would imagine it's just like today, right? A car is made. There's a company that makes the tires. There's a company that makes the airbags. There's a company that makes the brakes. So they would specialize in what they're doing, and then they would outsource it to a third party. That would be my guess, because we're now talking almost on an industrial level. Perhaps in the earlier days when there was a small farm, everything was in-house. They would have done it themselves. They would have had the mills, and they would have produced it, and it would be at a very, very slow rate. But I would say after the 16th century, or 17th century, I would say, rather, in Brazil, when it was the whole world was buying their sugar. I can't imagine this was done by just a few individuals. I would think there was tons. I mean, that was one of the people wanted to go to the new world. There was opportunity there. There was things to produce that you couldn't do in Europe. So people will move their whole lives there in hopes that they would make some coin. So yeah, my guess is that they were third parties, fourth, maybe more. I mean, especially the transport, right? I think that's half the job is getting the sugar to these areas that are waiting to purchase it from you. What good is it if you can't get it from the Americas to cross over to the Atlantic, and from the Atlantic you now have a ship and receiver that's now going to package it up and then bring it to the local. So I imagine it's a huge logistical chain like everything else today. But when you're making money, it kind of makes sense, But yeah, thank you for your question. So where does that bring us? That brings us to, sugar in the 20th century. So eventually in the 1860s, sugar production will be done in the United States, particularly here in New York, where they opened one of the biggest, if not the biggest, sugar plants here in Williamsburg, Long Island. Oh, not here, I'm in Long Island, New York. I'm sure we all heard of Domino Sugar, and they would be one of the biggest sugar companies in the world, producing tons of sugar, and it would go all over. It would be sent all throughout the country, and it would employ many jobs. And it was just it was an industry. It was a major part of American diet. Let's just say sugar was like in almost a lot of ingredients and just being used constantly. But no one really focusing on the health aspect of it. We're focusing on getting the sugar. We need to produce sugar. We need to find sugar. We need to get it cheap. We need to get it affordable. We need it. We can't use slaves anymore. We have to find another way. But nobody's realizing the harmfulness of sugar. Sugar is not necessarily something you should be consuming so much of. That's the thing. If you're having it here and there, but it seems like people in general just see sugar as, oh, great, this is something that I like, enjoy, and it's good for me. So by the 1940s, there is research, and people start to realize that sugar is really probably not the best thing for you, and keeping putting a cap on it is probably a good idea. You don't want to have sugar in every last thing, but that somehow falls on deaf ears. Even I'm going to point to the in the 1980s, which is not too far long ago, the FDA considers fat worse than sugar. And there's a conspiracy theory as to some of the companies that either create sugar or have foods with a lot of sugar, kind of push that so that they make fat look like the real problem of America, or people that are obese and so on and so forth. But throughout, most of us, I don't know what the age group is here, but yeah, I used to think butter and fat and anything salt was really not really the best thing for you to eat, and not so much sugar. But no, in reality, sugar is probably the number one lead cause of obesity and heart disease and being overweight, stuff like that. So nowadays we have we have a more of a better understanding and try to be more responsible. Companies try to create things that are not so much sugar-free. There's a study that I think saccharin came out in the 1950s, which is an alternative to sugar. Oh, but there's been ongoing studies saying that it could be cancerous, based on some lab rats that they did studies on, and they actually put like a ban on it for a little while, and it was lifted again in the 90s. I don't know. I'm not a fan of diet soda or anything diet for that matter. I know it's less in calories, but it just doesn't seem like it's the most natural. But again, like everything, it just depends on moderation, how much you're consuming, how much you're taking. If it's a part of your life every day. I mean, if you drink coffee every day, you're gonna have sugar every day. If you drink sugar in your coffee, that is, then it's something you want to be mindful of. But now we've actually come full circle in a sense that a lot of companies and just in general, people, public service announcements want to push natural sugars, that are less refined, that are more natural or close to nature, that are not as toxic to our brains, that don't make us feel addicted, don't give us the rush, don't make us repeat it, so that we're not like constantly craving it. And it's actually a better alternative, such as honey, such as stevia. Stevia is it comes from stevia plants. It's a form of sugar. I know some of the companies like Coca-Cola was using stevia for a little bit, but there's a debate as to how it tastes. Some people say it tastes sweeter than regular sugar, so it's not necessarily taken off, or just brown sugar in general, which is a little less refined. I still think it's just as sweet and has so much calories as regular sugar, but at least it's not as processed. So just again, I think that the key to everything is just moderation and just keeping it mixed with one day we'll have a sugary snack and one day we won't. It's just that's that. And that pretty much concludes my short, sweet presentation of sugar. I hope I didn't bore you too much. And if anybody has any questions or want to add any comments or have any recipes and want to share with me, I'd be happy to talk with you.
Anybody wants to raise hand? Maybe I can maybe unmute you or ask a question away on a chat. I just wanted to mention some. Sergio had mentioned that sugar was used in rum. This is very important. It was in British Empire. The word rum was created because that particular liquid made you Rombustus, and therefore you were basically was acting, so to speak, obviously a little bit of intoxication, and therefore it was called rum because of the word Rombustus. And that's why British Empire until 1970 it was given as a provision to British Navy. Okay, I think I have.
Oh, that's cool. I like that. I like that.
Yeah, Maymap had raised hand on me. You know what? If you guys are going to be respectful, I'm going to unmute everybody, and then maybe Maymap can ask her question, or he can ask a question. 1 second. Let me go security. 1 second. I'm going to give opportunity to people to unmute. Go ahead, Maymap. You can unmute yourself.
Hi. Over in Alexandria, Virginia, in the early 1800s, there were 2 sugar refineries for about 20 years. A lot of enslaved people were deployed to produce sugar there. It was a huge part of the economy. How unusual was that? Do you know? Were all the states in those early days having sugar refineries? What part of the, any idea how big a part of the national economy the production of sugar was? A lot of people became very, very wealthy off of sugar in Alexandria.
Yes, yeah, a great point. The refineries is another step of the sugar production. So the cane might have been grown somewhere else and then brought to the other states of the sugar producers. So I would say, yeah, that makes a lot of sense, because in Virginia and a lot of the South were like major areas where they had slaves, and so that, yeah, I think cotton and tobacco and a whole list of things were being grown in that region. I think not slavery, but just sugar refineries go other parts of the United States too. Puerto Rico had them. I mean, usually they're islands. I'm not sure a lot of in the continental US, but Hawaii had sugar refineries. So yeah, that's a great point. I think that makes a lot of sense.
Right, Hawaii was known before the travel industry took off as a sugar cane heaven. So therefore, as you know, Hawaii was an independent country up until the 20th century, when when it was taken over by the United States. Anybody else have any questions? Or raise hand and then unmute yourself. Or I can just again, I would like people to then, if you want, and I'm going to post it again, go to our website, like I said, omnicarta.org. If you like our presentation, join our group. If not, you can watch our videos, join our YouTube channel, so to speak. So, Sergio does quite a lot of presentations. We have many presenters, and we're basically driven by us wanting to learn history and basically be able to, not teach, but enjoy history through presenting. So this is, so to speak, is a club of people that want to learn history and more, deeply, and then present it on various subject matters, Roman history, Mesopotamian, Greek, what, Sergio just did, Middle Eastern, Dark Ages, modern history, anything you can think of. Our group is, very welcoming, very friendly. And Sergio, I really thank you. This was really amazing presentation.
Oh yeah, I had fun.
And I want to thank everybody for joining. And I want to wish everybody, happy the rest of the Sunday, and then hopefully see you in our presentations. And Robert had posted my group, and I'm gonna, also will post right now on chat. How can I see a recording? Sorry. So here is the website we have, and this recording is going to be posted today on that, on the YouTube channel that's connected to the website. YouTube channel is there. You could just go on either in the middle of the section of the YouTube channel, or you can just go directly to the click on the social network YouTube channel. And Sergio, again, thank you. This was very nice, and see you guys next time. Thank you.
My pleasure. Take care, everybody. Good night.
Bye.